The billionaire returned from his trip, freezing in shock at the scene before him. His little daughter, dressed in a filthy, tattered dress, was holding her 8-month-old baby brother in her arms. Her voice broke with sobs as she pleaded, "Please, don't hurt me and my brother anymore." From that very moment, every secret hidden inside the house began to unfold. Michael Hayes sat in his cold office at 43. He owned and worked from the top floor of the Freedom Tower in Chicago, one of the most luxurious buildings at the heart of the city. On his desk rested a silver pen and a thick stack of files. He signed each page like a machine, the crystal chandelier glinting off the Breitling on his wrist. The tailored suit fit perfectly across his broad shoulders, and the Italian leather shoes gleamed beneath the desk. Everything around him spoke of wealth, success, and power, the very things any American man might dream of. But inside, his heart was hollow. Michael had once known a happy family. Catherine, his first wife, had been the light of his life. Chloe, their first daughter, used to run around the yard with her soft brown hair bouncing in the wind. And now, there was Ben, the baby. Boy, only 8 months old, born in the middle of loss. The day Catherine left this world because of hemorrhaging after childbirth, Michael felt as though his life had been drained away. 8 months had passed, and he had not once sat down to play with Chloe, nor had he held Ben in his arms. He buried himself in business trips, paperwork, and numbers as if running away from memory. During that time, Lisa, his second wife, appeared like an angel. Once Catherine's close friend, she had stepped into the house with a gentle presence, soothing, everything broken with her sweet, radiant smile. To Michael, she was the devoted woman he needed. If Catherine had been light, then Lisa was the salvation of his life. She held both children as if they were her own, caring for them with the tenderness of a model mother. Seeing that, Michael felt reassured. He thought, at least the children have a woman at home. That is better than growing up with only a cold father. He was always grateful that she carried the burden he had abandoned. Today, after a month away on business, Michael closed the last file. He stood, catching his reflection in the tall mirror on the wall. His face was stern, his eyes weary. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. He wanted to go home early without telling anyone. He wanted to bring a small surprise. Maybe Chloe would run into his arms. Maybe Ben would smile when he held him close. The thought softened him. For the first time in months, Michael took his coat and walked out quickly before his secretary could ask another question. The luxury car sped along the road, leading back to his suburban estate. That house had once been filled with laughter, once warm with life. Now, it was a place Michael rarely touched, stopping only between trips. Today felt different. He wanted to see his family. The iron gates opened, and Michael stepped into the grand hall. Everything was unusually still. The golden glow of the chandelier fell across the marble floor. He set his briefcase down on the table and removed his coat. Then, from somewhere deeper in the house, he heard the faint sound of a child's sobs. "Ben." The sound pierced the silence. Michael froze. Amid the weak cries, another trembling voice followed, small and broken. "Please don't hurt me and my brother anymore." Michael's body stiffened. It was Chloe, his daughter's voice, choking, pleading. His whole body tensed, his heart seeming to stop. He moved forward slowly, following the hallway, and stopped just out of sight, behind the frame of the doorway leading into the living room. The scene before him made it hard to breathe. Chloe, 6 years old, her brown hair tangled, her pink dress, stained with dirt, sat huddled on the floor. Her small arms were wrapped tightly around Ben. The baby's face was red, his cries relentless, his tiny hands reaching out and clinging to his sister. Chloe bowed her head, her shoulders trembling. Standing across from them was Lisa. She wore a tight red dress, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her face heavily made up. But her voice was nothing like the sweetness she showed Michael. It was sharp, each word cutting like glass. "Shut up. How many times have I told you not to bother me? If you don't listen, I will throw both of you out on the street again." Michael rushed forward, placing himself between Lisa and the children. Stop. His voice was hoarse but firm. He reached out, trying to take Ben, his movements clumsy after so long without holding his son. Let me hold him. Chloe, come here to Daddy. The girl froze, her fingers gripping the edge of her dress. Michael hesitated for half a beat, his hand hovering in the air before pulling back, standing protectively in front of them by instinct alone. A flash of venom crossed Lisa's eyes, sharp as a needle. In an instant, it vanished behind a gentle smile. You're back. I was just teaching the kids some discipline. They were being too wild. She stepped closer, placing a light hand on the sleeve of Michael's jacket. Her voice softened like honey. You must be tired after coming home. Don't get so worked up over a moment of childish whining. The doctor said kids need discipline, didn't he? I've been with them all month. I understand their behavior better. Michael held Ben tightly, his throat burning. He glanced at Chloe, saw the panic in her eyes, then back at Lisa's tender smile. She tilted her head, pressing her lips together as if with pity. Or maybe you just feel guilty for being away too long, so everything looks worse than it is. Don't weigh yourself down. Children look at the adults around them. The words slipped out, soft as a breeze but sharp as a blade. Michael lowered his eyes, swallowing hard. He spoke slowly, struggling to keep calm. I don't want to hear crying like that in this house. Lisa seized the words, twisting them into her excuse. Exactly. That's why I'll handle it the gentlest way. Go take a shower, change, make yourself comfortable. Don't let the kids see us at odds. It's not good for their minds. As she finished, she cast a sidelong glance at Chloe. A single faint smirk was enough to make the girl bow her head, a snake hidden beneath velvet. And Michael saw it, though he could not name it in time. He stood frozen, half anger, half guilt tangled into a knot inside him. One painful, haunting question echoed in his mind. What did I just witness? Michael took a deep breath, adjusted the child in his arms so he would not slip, then stepped into the living room as if everything were still normal. Lisa had already put on a gentle look, her voice warm but clearly forced. You came home early. You surprised me. I'll tell the kitchen to prepare dinner. Sit and rest. I'll take care of the rest. Michael nodded. He glanced at Ben, who was still sobbing, his chest tightening with the feeling that he had missed something deeply important during the past 8 months. Lisa snapped her fingers lightly, and the housekeeper appeared in the kitchen doorway. It was Mrs. Jones, an older woman who had worked for the family since the days when Catherine was alive. She was discreet, well-mannered, and spoke little. She bowed gently to Michael, then returned inside to set the table. Dinner was quickly arranged. The yellow light reflected on the silver cutlery. The smell of chicken soup rose warmly, yet it could not drive away the cold inside Michael. He sat at the head of the table, Lisa to his right, Chloe across from him, and Ben in a small chair, his eyes still wet and unsettled. Eat, sweetheart, so you'll grow strong. Lisa spoke as she placed a piece of meat into Chloe's bowl. Her voice was sweet as honey, her smile fixed in place, but the hand she laid on the girl's shoulder pressed a little too firmly. Michael saw Chloe's small shoulders flinch and the spoon in her hand tremble. He leaned slightly forward, observing more carefully. On Chloe's left wrist were faint purple marks, stretched like fading bruises. Michael's heart pounded, and he heard his own voice rise slow and heavy. Chloe, has anyone at school been bullying you? The girl startled. Her eyes flashed with fear before dropping quickly. Her voice was small, barely a whisper. No. No, Father. Lisa let out a soft laugh and turned to Michael. Children bump into each other when they play. I keep reminding her to be careful. Michael stayed silent, twirling the spoon in his hand. A wave of guilt ran down his spine, knowing that for months he had not been here to notice these little things. Suddenly, Ben kicked his legs, his lips curved downward, and a wail burst out into a long cry. Lisa stood, walked around to pick him up, her hands sliding under his arms but gripping too tightly. The movement was quick but without tenderness, and Ben screamed louder, his face flushed red. "Give him to me." Michael quickly stood, extending his arms, his voice hoarse and urgent. Lisa glanced at him briefly, then handed the boy over. Michael awkwardly caught him, his arms stiff like wood after so long without holding his son. Chloe lifted her head, her eyes filled with both surprise and hope. Michael adjusted his hold, bringing the boy closer, rocking him gently. Ben kept crying, but his sobs grew less sharp and Michael's own breath slowed with each steady pat on the boy's back. "You're safe now. Daddy's here," Michael whispered. The words left his mouth, and he suddenly realized how long it had been since he last said something like that. Dinner dragged on slowly. Lisa kept starting conversations to fill the silence, bringing up a new investment portfolio, asking Michael about his business trip, sometimes turning to Chloe with a half-hearted question as if to prove she cared. Mrs. Jones stood quietly in the corner of the room, her hands clasped together. She did not interrupt once, but when Michael caught her gaze, he saw in her eyes an unease she could not hide. He was about to call her over, but Lisa had already offered dessert, leaving his question caught in his chest. When the meal ended, Michael set his napkin on the table and spoke calmly. "I'm going upstairs to change and look over some documents. Chloe, make sure you brush your teeth after you finish eating." "Yes, Dad." Chloe's reply was faint, her eyes flickering quickly before dimming again. Michael pushed back his chair, lifted Ben, and handed the boy to Lisa. This time he noticed her hand more closely, her thumb pressing into the child's side. With a practiced reflex, Michael pressed his lips together and said nothing. He turned away and walked toward the stairs, the wooden steps creaking softly under his feet. At the fourth step he froze. He had heard the faint clinking of glasses, the scrape of a chair, and then Lisa's voice dropped low, sharp as a blade slicing through silk. "Listen carefully. Remember what I say. If you dare open your mouth to your father, I will throw you. And your brother out on the street, I swear it." There was a pause, followed by the sound of quick, shallow breathing, surely Chloe's. And then a strangled whisper. "Please, please don't. I'll stay quiet. I won't say a word." Michael stood paralyzed, his hand gripping the banister until his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded against his ribs as if trying to break free. His mind flashed with the images he had just seen. Lisa's shifting voice, sweet one moment, venomous the next. His daughter's terrified eyes, the bruises on her thin wrists, Ben's cries in arms that were not his own. Downstairs, Lisa's tone shifted again. She gave a thin laugh and spoke louder, just enough for her words to slip through the stairwell. "Good. Finish your food and then I'll give you dessert." Michael still did not move. Sweat dampened his palms even though his body felt cold. He swallowed, hard, but his throat stayed dry. His anger and guilt wrapped around him, squeezing until he could hardly breathe. Mrs. Jones stepped softly out of the kitchen, her shoes making almost no sound. She paused, her eyes lifting briefly toward the staircase as if she knew someone was there but dared not look directly. She placed a folded towel on the lower banister, a small, discreet gesture that felt like a message. Michael bit hard on the inside of his cheek to steady himself. He knew he could not simply walk away as if nothing had happened, yet he also understood that a single outburst now might frighten those trembling little hands even more. He tightened his grip on the railing, drew in a long breath, and forced the breaking wave inside him back down. And so he remained there, on that step, listening to the pounding of his own heart, the faint clatter of a spoon against a bowl, and the rise of a new and unmistakable command within him, a vow he could not delay even one more day. Michael's hand still gripped the banister. He inhaled deeply, released it, then returned to the dining table and spoke a short sentence to bring dinner to an end. After that, he went into the study, closed the door, and stood in silence for a long time by the bookshelf. That night, he did not sleep, only listening to the small footsteps of his children and the whispers echoing down the hallway like needles piercing skin. When the sky turned pale, he washed his face with cold water, adjusted his collar, and walked straight to the kitchen. Mrs. Jones was placing dishes onto the wooden shelf. She was the elderly housekeeper who had lived in this home since the time Catherine was a young bride. She was quiet, meticulous, and always kept the proper boundaries. Hearing Michael's steps, she froze, her thin, dry hands still holding the cloth. "How were the children while I was away?" Michael asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes could not hide the exhaustion. She hesitated, looked down, then sighed. "Do you want the truth?" Michael nodded. "I only want the truth." She set the cloth down, speaking slowly so as not to stumble over her emotions. Some nights, Miss Lisa made the girl stand on the porch for a long time just for dropping a spoon. One night I found her holding her little brother sleeping in the storage room because their bedroom was locked. Many times, Ben was given only very diluted milk. He cried from hunger until he fell asleep. I tried to intervene, but she told me I had no right to interfere with her way of raising them. Michael felt his heart clench. The image of Catherine holding a bowl of porridge, lifting Chloe onto the chair, smiling as she told a bedtime story, came back like a blade cutting through memory. He swallowed, keeping his voice even. "Did you hear her make any threats?" "Yes." Her answer was soft, her eyes still fixed on the cloth. "She said if the girl ever told you, both children would be thrown out. She also threatened to fire me if I ever spoke of it. I truly am sorry, sir. She is far too cunning." Michael shook his head, resting a hand on the back of a chair to keep it from trembling. "It is not your fault. From now on, if anything happens, you tell me directly. And if necessary, would you be willing to testify?" She raised her eyes, and in them was a quiet resolve. "For the children, I am willing." That entire day, Michael moved through the rooms as if inspecting an unfinished work site. He called his office, postponed every meeting, excusing himself with family matters. He went into the children's room, opened the closet to check blankets, examined the bottles, and took notes in a tight, pressed script. Every small trace was like an accusation. Lisa smiled at him softly, inquiring about his work, but Michael said little. He told her they would talk later and asked the kitchen to prepare a light dinner. He did not want to cause noise. He wanted to see clearly. The night fell very slowly. In the study, Michael pushed the files aside until only the small frame of Catherine remained before him. He placed his hand on the wooden surface, an apology lodged in his throat. The desk lamp lit the lines at the corners of his eyes. Outside in the hallway, the wind whistled faintly through the crack of the door. Then came the sound of hesitant steps, stopping at the threshold. The door opened slightly. Chloe stood there, holding Ben tightly as he dozed, her eyes swollen and red as if she had been crying for a long time. Michael rose quietly, afraid of shattering the fragile shell wrapping his children. He took Ben into his arms, feeling how light the boy's body was and how uneven his breath came from exhaustion. The faint smell of watered-down milk clung to his collar. He motioned for Chloe to sit, pulling a chair so they could be at eye level, but the girl still sat on the edge, her back stiff, her eyes flicking often toward the door. "Dad?" The small call was barely a fragment of breath, then it faded. Michael nodded as if to say there was no need to force out more words. He patted Ben's back in an even rhythm, catching the faint gurgle of the boy's stomach. Chloe pulled, her sleeve down to cover her wrist, her fingertips brushing the frayed hem of her dress, her legs drawing up at times when a distant sound stirred in the hallway. The air in the room was thick with pauses, as if every sentence wanted to rise but then retreated again. Michael handed her a cup of warm water. Chloe received it with both hands, sipped a tiny swallow, her eyes still fixed on the outline of the door frame as though expecting someone to walk in. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions but stopped himself, afraid that even one misplaced word might make her retreat further. He chose instead a neutral phrase light as placing a blanket over her shoulders. "Sit here where it's warm." The girl nodded, let out a short breath, then lowered her eyes. As her sleeve slipped back, a purple mark surfaced for a moment and then vanished like a fish diving into dark water. Michael saw it but pretended not to, his chest tightening with partial understanding, and with the weight of not yet having enough proof to name the rest. Ben drifted into drowsy sleep, his small hand clinging to Michael's collar as though it were the last anchor he had. Michael stayed perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might wake the fragile fears trying to lie quiet. "It's safe here." His voice was just above a whisper, its warmth carrying more than the words themselves. Chloe gave a faint nod, her lips quivering as though she meant to speak, but then she fell silent. Outside, the wind slipped through the crack of the door in a thin line, rattling the key hook. The girl flinched, her hand curling back in a reflex born of long practice. Michael reached out, intending to rest a light touch on her wrist as reassurance. Chloe recoiled slightly, her chair creaking the softest sound. He froze instantly, his hand suspended in the air, then withdrew it as though from a flame. The silence thickened with another layer. Inside his chest, a question broke loose. When did the distance between father and daughter become this wide? My own child, is she afraid of even my hand? Michael stood still for a long time after Chloe pulled her hand away. He drew in a deep breath, placed Ben back in the crib, and pulled the blanket over him. Chloe sat curled up on the chair, hugging her knees, her eyes still swollen. Michael bent down, speaking slowly so she could hear him clearly. "Sleep here tonight. I'll be right next to you." Chloe nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. Michael dimmed the light, closed the door to his study, and walked into the empty hallway. The silence of the night seemed to swallow every breath. He could not sleep. Images of Catherine and her warm smile rose again and again out of the darkness. He opened the door to his late wife's old room. A faint fragrance still lingered on the shawl that hung behind the door. Michael opened the wardrobe and pulled out the small drawer where Catherine used to keep Chloe's cards. A thin envelope slipped, off the edge of the drawer, caught against the wooden rim. On the front was the handwriting he knew so well. To Michael. He froze. His hand trembled as he opened the letter. The slanted handwriting seemed like Catherine's voice speaking to him. "If I am no longer here, please protect Chloe and Ben. Do not place your trust too quickly in anyone. Believe in your child's eyes. When she is afraid, she will not know how to lie." Michael sank down onto the floor, the paper quivering with his breath. His mind filled with the sight of Chloe clutching her little brother, her dress torn and filthy, her eyes wide with fear. Ben had felt so light in his arms, his breathing broken from hunger and exhaustion. A wave of grief surged through him. No longer a vague sense of guilt, but a sharp, searing ache of fatherly love that tightened his chest. He pressed the letter against his chest, closed his eyes as if hearing Catherine's voice guiding him word by word. "I am sorry, Catherine. From now on, I will protect our children." He opened his eyes, stood, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, as though sealing a vow. His hand brushed the picture frame on the shelf. From that moment, the decision became simple. He would return to being a father in the truest sense. He held the letter against his chest for a long time, until the hallway light flickered faintly with the wind. When he finally rose, his back ached, but inside him a cord had tightened, pulling him straight forward. The next morning, Michael woke early. He brewed coffee, listening to Mrs. Jones's footsteps in the kitchen, the faint clink of a spoon. Lisa appeared soon after, neatly dressed, smiling as usual. "Did you sleep well? Today I'll take Chloe to her music class. Let's have an early dinner tonight." Michael gave a restrained smile. "I have things to do at home. You keep to your schedule." He said nothing more. All day, he remained calm, as if smoothing the last crease on a suit, yet his eyes never left Lisa's movements. By mid-afternoon, she received a call, lowering her voice. "All right, 10 minutes in the back garden." Michael stood on the porch, a coffee cup in hand. He changed course, circling along the stone path, and stopped behind the row of poplars. The back lawn was still, without wind. A stranger entered through the side gate, a man in his 30s wearing a dark coat, a thin bag slung over his shoulder. Lisa approached him, her smile no longer the gentle one she wore inside the house. "Right on time, madam." The man shook her hand quickly. "I only have 10 minutes. Are you sure about the authorization?" Lisa lowered her voice. "It's a large sum. I want to bring it in early." The trust is under Hayes's name. If the signature is transferred, I'll gain control. Adam glanced around, then pulled out a thin stack of papers. I need more proof you have the right. The marriage certificate is there, but the proxy signature for the family fund is still missing. Hayes isn't a fool. Lisa gave a cold smile. Don't worry, he's busy playing the perfect father. As for the rest, I'll get it another way. Adam folded the papers. No more than 2 weeks. After that, the plan will be harder. Thank you. Lisa touched his hand with a familiar gesture. Keep it quiet for me. Michael stood behind the trees, his heart pounding heavily. He had heard enough to understand where the blade was pointing. It wasn't just the shouting in the kitchen, not just the threats on the stairs. This was a step across another line. Adam left through the side gate. Lisa lingered a moment, adjusted her hair, then walked back into the house with a calm face. Michael still didn't move. He opened his phone, the black screen reflecting his own face. 3 tasks lined up in his mind, as straight as ruled lines. Protect the children, preserve the evidence, and call an old friend who knew the law. He went back inside, passing through the living room. Chloe was stacking wooden blocks for Ben, glancing now and then toward the kitchen. Her eyes flicked toward him, still carrying some caution, but there was also a small glimmer. Michael paused for a second, laying his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. You're here with me. Chloe nodded, her lips forming a faint word. Yes? Michael kept walking, his hand gripping Catherine's letter inside his jacket pocket. His heartbeat surged, not from fear but from a late awakening turning into action. He knew what he would have to face, and he understood something else, chilling in its simplicity. She isn't only mistreating my children, she is plotting for the inheritance too. Michael tightened his grip on the letter in his pocket and walked straight toward the living room. He stopped beside the play rug, bent down to pick up a wooden block that had rolled away, and placed it in Chloe's hand. His voice lowered to reassure her. You stay here with Daddy. Chloe gave a slight nod, her eyes darting toward the kitchen, as if to check whether anyone was listening. That night, Michael stayed in the living room longer than usual. He sat beside them, opened a children's book that Catherine used to read to Chloe years ago, and read slowly, letting each word linger. His other hand tapped a steady rhythm on Ben's back until the boy's breathing became calm and even. Every time footsteps passed by, Chloe stiffened, her little hand clutching at the hem of her dress, her gaze shifting to the window as if searching for an escape. Seeing this, Michael whispered, It's all right, Daddy is here. Lisa passed by once. She smiled faintly and asked as though in passing, It's late. Let me take the children to their room. They have school tomorrow. Michael looked up, his tone deliberately calm. I'll do it. Lisa shrugged and turned away, leaving behind a trace of perfume that could not mask the unease beneath her polished manner. Mrs. Jones came, carrying a warm glass of milk. She placed it on the table by the chair, her eyes glancing at the door before meeting Michael's, as if to remind him not to let the children out of his sight. Michael thanked her, urged Chloe to take a few sips, then placed Ben in the portable crib, pulling it close beside his chair. He finished the page of the story in a steady, low voice. When the clock struck late, Michael carried Ben and guided Chloe toward the children's bedroom. The door stood ajar, the room tidy but cold. He straightened the blankets, laid the boy in the crib, pulled a small chair close for Chloe to sit beside the bed, and spoke slowly. Daddy is right here. Go to sleep. Chloe nodded, but before closing her eyes, she still glanced outside as if waiting for some sound. Michael dimmed the hallway light, stood at the doorway a while longer, then returned to his study, deciding to move his chair closer to the door so that with one glance, he could still see the faint light spilling from the children's room. Near midnight. Michael lifted his head from the stack of papers when he heard a faint metallic clink at the end of the hallway. He rose quickly, following the sound, his heartbeat racing. Before he could steady himself, someone had turned off the hallway light, leaving the space blurred in shadow. Michael flicked the switch, and the sudden brightness made him squint. In front of the children's room, Chloe was sitting hunched on the floor, clutching Ben tightly, the baby hastily wrapped in a thin blanket. Her eyes were red, her cheek pressed against her brother's forehead to keep him warm. The lock on the outside of the door clicked just as it released, and Michael understood. At once. "Who left you out here?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse with anger, though he managed to restrain it. She locked the room," Chloe whispered, each word catching in her throat as her arms tightened protectively around her brother. Michael knelt, gathered them both, holding Ben firmly against his chest while lifting Chloe up with his other arm. "Come with Daddy." He carried the children back to his room, pushed the door until it met the frame and locked it softly, moving slowly so as not to startle them. Michael laid Ben in the middle of the bed, propped soft pillows around him, and pulled the blanket to his chest. He slid a chair close for Chloe beside the edge of the bed, then poured the rest of the warm milk into a small cup. "Drink a little before you sleep. You're tired already." Chloe clutched the cup with both hands, her lips pressed tight to hold back a sob, her eyes fixed on her father's mouth as if waiting for a clear promise. Michael sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on the blanket covering his daughter's legs. He did not touch her skin for fear she might flinch, but he left the warmth of his hand there like an invisible thread connecting them. "I'm here tonight. You'll sleep in my room." In the softened glow of the night lamp, Chloe looked up, her gaze lingering on the face of the man who had only appeared in brief flashes over the past 8 months between work trips. Her voice trembled, breaking at the end of the sentence. "Dad, are you going to abandon us like my stepmother said?" Michael froze, his breath caught in his chest. Words so natural before now vanished. For a long moment he could only pull the little girl closer and hold her against him. His chin rested on the crown of her head, the familiar scent of milk and child sweat burning his eyes. He did not know how to answer without sounding late, without sounding false. He only repeated the one thing he could be certain of. "I'm here." Chloe gave the faintest nod, her small hand gripping the hem of his shirt like holding on to a piece of driftwood. Ben stirred, let out a faint murmur and drifted back into sleep. Michael stayed still, listening to the breaths of the 2 children blending together, his own heartbeat slowing and heavy like a silent promise being signed again in the dark. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps stopping right outside the bedroom door. Michael tensed instinctively, his arm tightening protectively around Chloe's shoulders. Through the crack in the door came Lisa's voice, smooth as silk, yet cold as thin steel. "I think we need to talk, Michael." Michael gently squeezed Chloe's shoulder to reassure her, then sat her down on the bed and pulled the blanket up for Ben. He stood, opened the door just enough for Lisa to see him. "The kids are asleep. Whatever it is, we'll talk in the morning." Lisa smiled, stepped back, her voice still soft. "As you wish." The door closed. Michael sat down in the chair, pulled out his phone, and dialed a familiar number. "Frank, come by my house tomorrow evening. There's something in the portfolio we need to discuss." On the other end, the man answered briefly, "All right, 7-1. Frank Coleman was a corporate attorney in his 40s, discreet and straightforward. He had been with Michael since his earliest deals, understood how Michael thought, and could read details most people overlooked. He wasn't only skilled with contracts but also deeply knowledgeable about family trusts and asset protection, which was why Michael believed Frank's presence would be far more valuable than a polite dinner. The next evening, Lisa took charge of the kitchen. She chose a white tablecloth, arranged red roses, and set gleaming silverware in place. When Frank arrived, Lisa came out to greet him with just the right smile, carrying the poise of a perfect hostess. "Such a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Coleman. Please come in." Frank shook Michael's hand, his gaze sweeping the room before stopping at the corner where Chloe was holding Ben. He nodded to the children with a warm smile. Dinner began with soup. Lisa was attentive to every gesture in front of the guest. She placed the tenderest piece of meat into Chloe's bowl, bent down to wipe a trace of milk from Ben's lip, and spoke with honeyed sweetness. "Eat up, darling, so you'll grow strong." Chloe replied softly, Yes, ma'am. Then tried to lift a small spoonful. Michael glanced over. On his daughter's shoulder, Lisa's hand seemed casually placed, but her fingers pressed down hard enough to make the fragile muscle tighten. Chloe's face tensed. The spoon trembled. Michael kept his expression calm, as if he hadn't noticed, but a burning heat rose in his chest. Frank filled the silence with business talk. I reviewed the infrastructure fund update. The allocation is leaning too heavily toward bonds. How long are you planning to stay defensive? Michael answered briefly, while setting his hand on the table as a signal. I need to review the structure of the family trust. I'll have you look it over. Lisa's eyes flicked quickly, then she smiled again. Mr. Coleman, you're always so thoughtful, always keeping the family's security in mind. When the main course was served, Frank turned to ask the chef about the sauce. He looked away for just a moment. Lisa leaned close to Chloe's ear, her voice as thin as a blade. Remember this. If you so much as whisper a word, your little brother will pay the price. Chloe froze, lowered her spoon, her eyes downcast. From that moment on, she ate no more. She sat silently, her hands tucked under the table to cover her wrist still marked with old bruises. Michael noticed the motion. He lifted his glass of water, concealed a long, steady breath, and set it down firmly in its place as if placing a small period on the decision he had just made. After dinner, Lisa poured tea. I'll take the children upstairs first. She bent down, picked up Ben, and smoothed Chloe's hair in front of the guests. Come on, sweetheart. Chloe stood up. Before leaving, the girl glanced at Michael for a second, her eyes waiting as if asking whether it was safe. Michael gave a small nod. Go on. I'll be up later. The living room was left with just the two men. Frank set his teacup down, leaning back slightly into the chair. He talked a bit more about the fund, then lowered his voice. You want me to review the trust structure, don't you? Michael answered shortly. Yes, and also the power of representation. Frank nodded. All right, but let me ask you this. He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Michael. Since the moment I walked into this house, I saw a child flinch, her shoulders in reflex from pain, an infant being held the wrong way, and a lady of the house controlling every glance. Did you call me for money or for something else? Michael stayed silent for a few seconds. He placed two fingers on the edge of the table to keep rhythm, then spoke slowly. Both, but the latter matters more. Frank didn't rush. He pulled a small notebook from his briefcase and opened to a blank page. Then let's begin with the truth. Tell me what you've seen, what you've heard, and who you want to protect. Michael recounted in short fragments, without adding or omitting. The words on the staircase, the lock on the outside of the bedroom door, the bruises and the threat just now. Frank jotted down a few key words, never interrupting, only nodding when needed. Lisa returned, smiling at the two men. Do you need anything else? Frank replied politely. Thank you. The tea was very good. She closed the door behind her. He waited a beat before continuing, lowering his voice further. My friend, I'm afraid your second wife is hiding much more than she lets on, and I can help you uncover the truth. Michael looked straight at his friend. In his eyes, the burning anger had settled into a cold determination. Where should we begin? Frank left around 9. Wow. Michael walked him to the door, kept his hand on the knob for a moment to steady his breath, then turned back into the house. He opened the children's room door slightly, saw Chloe and Ben already asleep, pulled the blanket up to his daughter's shoulders, and placed the teddy bear back beside her. Then he closed the door and went straight down to the living room. Lisa was pouring wine, the crystal glass casting a dark red reflection. I need to talk to you right now. Michael stood across from her, his voice low and firm. Chloe has a bruise, explain it to me. Lisa set the glass down, the corner of her lips lifting. Are you accusing me? I spent the whole day here with the kids. Did you see me cooking? Bathing them? Watching when they cried? She grabbed the glass again and slammed it down hard on the table. The stem cracked with a sharp sound. the wine splashing across the surface. "I'll ask again." Michael did not look away. "What did you do to my child?" Lisa let out a dry laugh. "Do you really think I want to take care of Catherine's children? Can't you see? From beginning to end, you never chose me. You only chose her, Shadow." Michael froze for a moment. He placed 2 fingers on the table to steady his rhythm. "Stay on point. Answer why the girl has a bruise." "Children fall." Lisa folded her arms. "Besides, she's stubborn. She needs to learn to obey. I teach her the way a mother teaches a child. A mother." Michael tilted his head. "Are you talking about Catherine? She taught them by holding them and speaking with them, not by locking doors and threatening." For a brief second, Lisa's face shifted, then turned cold. She leaned forward, her voice cutting. "Catherine, always perfect, gentle, intelligent, everyone adored her. And me? I was nothing but her shadow. Did you marry me out of pity? Or because Catherine asked you before she died?" Michael kept silent for a few seconds, letting the weight of the truth settle. He spoke slowly, each word striking with precision. "I married you because I thought the children needed a woman in the house. I was wrong. And tonight I corrected it." Lisa burst into laughter, her voice thick with resentment. "Corrected how? By throwing me out? Do you think the court will believe you? You were away for a month on business. Who cared for the children? Me. Who fed the baby his milk? Me. And where were you? Hiding in your gilded office?" Michael did not back down. "You know why I called the lawyer here tonight. You know what I saw, and you also know what I heard." Lisa slammed her hand on the table. "Fine. Then listen closely." She spat out each word, her eyes blazing as if they were about to shatter. "I hate her, and I hate those 2 children who carry Catherine's face even more. Every time I look at them, I feel like I've lost. I was by your side when you collapsed while she lay cold on a metal table. But you never once looked at me as the one you chose. Never." Michael exhaled, long and pained. "You're right about one thing. I didn't choose anyone. I only ran from grief. But from tonight on, I choose to stand with those children. I won't let anyone hurt them. Not even you." Lisa tilted her head, her smile stretching like a cut across her face. "You think you can take everything back? You forget I am the legal wife. I have rights in this house, in this trust. If you want to fight, I'm ready." "Tomorrow," Michael said, his voice flat and cold. "I'll meet with the lawyer about the trust and guardianship. I'll also speak with the police about abuse if necessary. You should prepare yourself." "You wouldn't dare," Lisa sneered. "You'll humiliate yourself in court. People will say Michael Hayes couldn't keep his wife, couldn't keep his house, couldn't keep his children. Can you live with that?" "I can live with their words." Michael lifted the napkin and set it down neatly, as if signing something in silence. "What I cannot live with is the sound of my children crying." Lisa faltered for half a beat, then flared again. "Then just wait and see who ends up thrown out of this house." A soft creak of wood on the stairs made them both turn. On the landing, Chloe stood pressed against the banister, clutching her teddy bear. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. The small hand slid across the bear's fur, and the toy nearly tumbled down the steps. Chloe bent to grab it, her hands trembling so badly that, even when she hugged it tight, it still slipped. Michael took a step toward the stairs, his hand lifting on instinct. Lisa's smile sharpened into something cruel. Neither of them said another word. The air froze around the ragged breaths of a child trying not to cry. Michael managed to catch the teddy bear, placed it back into Chloe's hands, and whispered for her to return to her room. He closed the door, leaned against it for a few seconds to steady his breathing, then dialed Frank's number. "We start the process tomorrow morning." On the other end, Frank gave only a short reply. "See you at the courthouse. 9 hours. The family." Court hallway in Chicago smelled of paper and weak coffee. Frank Coleman walked beside Michael, holding a thick file that already included Mrs. Jones's statement and photos of the bruises. Chloe clutched Michael's hand, while Ben had been left with a court-appointed babysitter outside the courtroom. Lisa arrived with a man in a dark blue suit, her attorney named Alan Pierce. She wore light makeup, held a tissue, and her eyes glistened just enough in the right places. Case number 14 Farad, the clerk called out. Hayes petitioning for emergency. Protection for minors, all four walked in. All rise. The guard's voice was steady. Judge Eleanor Myers sat above them. She was about 50, with bright eyes, a woman who spoke little but observed much. Frank began, Your Honor, we request an emergency protection order and restrictions on contact for the respondent Lisa Hayes on the basis of emotional abuse and neglect. We have the housekeeper's testimony, photographs of the injuries, and a letter from the plaintiff's late wife as context. Alan lifted his chin, cutting in immediately. Your Honor, my client is a devoted stepmother. These accusations are speculation. There is no direct evidence. Lisa dabbed at the corner of her eye. The girl is sensitive, Your Honor. I only disciplined her as any mother would. The judge nodded. Call the witness. Mrs. Jones stepped up to the stand, her hands clasped together. Frank asked concisely, What did you see? I saw the girl repeatedly forced to stand outside on the porch. One night she had to sleep in the storage room with her brother because her bedroom door was locked. The boy was often given only watered-down milk. I heard Mrs. Hayes threaten to throw them out if the girl told her father. Frank asked, You are certain it was the respondent's voice? Yes, I was 2 meters away. Alan approached, his tone flat. How old are you? 62. Could your memory have been mistaken in a dark hallway? No. Her answer was short. I worked in that house for 10 years. I do not mistake her voice. Alan raised his brow. Do you have any personal grudge against my client? No. I am only afraid for the children. Frank presented a stack of photographs. Photographs of bruises on Chloe's left wrist, taken 2 days ago, time-stamped. The judge examined them carefully, tilting her head slightly. Alan quickly countered. Children run, they fall. Injuries are normal. The photos don't prove who caused them. Lisa lowered her face, sobbing at just the right rhythm. I did my best. He was gone for months on business trips. Everything fell on me. Michael stood upright, his hands clasped together to steady his trembling. Frank moved on to the letter. This is a letter Mrs. Catherine Hayes left behind. It is not behavioral evidence, but it provides context about the family and her instruction to protect the children. The letter was handed up. The judge read a portion, paused for a few seconds, then set it down. The court acknowledges it. The courtroom was tense, like a drawn string. The judge glanced from one side to the other. The court requires more direct evidence. Can the child speak? Frank looked at Michael as if asking for permission. Michael leaned down, whispering to Chloe. You don't have to say anything if you're afraid. I'm right here. Chloe looked at the high chair where the judge sat, then at her father's open hand waiting for her. She took a short breath. I want to speak. Chloe stepped up to the witness stand. Her shoes tapped softly against the wooden edge. The clerk asked her name and age. Chloe answered in a small voice. My name is Chloe Hayes, 6 years old. The judge nodded slightly, lowering her tone. You only need to tell the truth. Chloe looked down at her hands, then raised her head. This, time staring straight ahead, she said. If I told my dad, she would throw me and my brother out onto the street. But I can't stay silent anymore. I don't want my little brother to grow up in fear. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she did not cry. From the bench below, Michael lifted a hand to cover his eyes, his breath escaping in a short sob. Frank set his pen down, not writing another word. The room was silent. Judge Myers leaned back in her chair, her fingers interlaced. She looked at Lisa, then at Alan. She looked at Michael and then back to Chloe. Thank you, child. Alan tried to recover. Your Honor, a child's words can be influenced. The judge raised her hand. That's enough. She turned to the clerk. Bring me the photographs again, and summon the child protection officer waiting in the hallway to come in after the session. Then she lowered her voice to Chloe. Would you like to sit with the clerk for a while? Chloe nodded, stepped down, passed by Michael and paused for half a second. Michael squeezed her hand gently. Titiao. Air had just begun to loosen when Lisa's chair suddenly screeched back. She shot to her feet, pointing toward the witness stand, her voice bursting out like a lid blown off. Liar, you're just like your mother, always pretending to be so saintly. Lisa's scream was still trembling in the courtroom when the bailiff stepped forward, quickly placing his hand out to stop her from advancing further. Judge Myers struck the gavel 3 times, her voice sharp and decisive. Order! The defendant will sit down immediately. Lisa let out a harsh laugh, but her shoulders had stiffened. Alan tugged at her sleeve, whispering a few words in an attempt to suppress the fire that had just flared up. Frank leaned forward to shield Chloe from the sight. Michael placed the flat of his hand on his daughter's back, calming her with the gentlest touch. The judge glanced over the file once more, then raised her eyes. Based on the testimony, the photographs of the injuries, the contextual letter, along with the threatening behavior directed at a minor, the court issues an emergency protective order. The defendant, Lisa Hayes, is hereby suspended from all custody and visitation rights until a final ruling is made. Temporary custody is granted to the plaintiff, Michael Hayes. Furthermore, the court refers this case to the district attorney's office for investigation into child abuse and fraudulent conduct concerning the family trust assets. At the clerk's instruction, Carla Reyes, a social worker from the Department of Child Services, entered the room. She was about 35 years old, her voice steady, a professional who had handled many similar cases before. She bowed to the judge, then turned to Michael. I will coordinate to ensure safety starting right now. Chloe clung even tighter to Michael's hand. He nodded, his eyes moist. The judge paused briefly, fixing her gaze directly on Lisa. The court also notes the defendant's insulting and threatening behavior toward a child inside this courtroom. The defendant is held in contempt of court and remanded to custody for 24 hours. Lisa's eyes bulged. Alan leaned closer, lowering, his voice in a desperate plea, but the bailiff had already motioned for her to follow procedure. The gavel fell one final time. This temporary hearing is adjourned. Michael bent down and held Chloe tightly. The little girl buried her face against his shoulder, the stuffed bear wedged between her small arms. He wrapped another arm around Ben when Carla brought the boy closer, as if afraid that even the smallest gap might let the cold wind seep in. Tears poured down his face before he could wipe them away. Frank placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, silent. Outside the courthouse, the hallway exploded with the sound of camera shutters and urgent questions. A young reporter from the local station, Jenna Price, held out her microphone. Mr. Hayes, do you have anything you'd like to say to the public? Frank stepped half a pace forward, raising his arm to shield them. Make way, please. We are protecting the children's privacy. Michael only bowed his head, pressing Chloe and Ben close against his chest, carrying all 3 of them through the flood of lights, as though walking through a heavy rain. Behind them, Lisa was led out through a different passage. But when she saw Michael, she jerked violently, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. You took everything from me, but remember this, Michael. One day you'll pay for it. Michael stopped for half a beat. He didn't answer. He pulled Chloe closer. One hand steadying Ben's back, his head bent slightly as if shielding them beneath an invisible umbrella. The gesture itself spoke louder than any words. No one will ever touch them again. Frank leaned close to Michael's ear and whispered, Go home right away. I'll continue working with the prosecutor and CPS. There will be patrols around your house tonight. Carla nodded. I'll come by to check the home environment, mostly so Chloe can see that the adults are standing on her side. As they walked to the car, Jenna called out one last time, but her voice softened into a blessing. Good luck to the 3 of you. Michael turned his head and gave a small nod. Chloe clutched her stuffed bear tightly, her eyes looking out the window, her breathing calmer now. Night fell quickly over the courthouse parking lot. In the back corridor, the metal door shut with a dry, sharp click. Lisa sat inside a small holding cell, the white light glaring down on a face drained, pale, with rage. Her hand clutched the bars so tightly her knuckles turned white. The sound of the guard's boots faded away. The room was left with nothing but her heavy breathing and the smell of cold steel. She lifted her head, staring into the darkness between the bars, whispering to herself as if swallowing the bitterness of her defeat. "Catherine, in the end you still won, but just wait. I swear once I'm out of this place I won't leave your husband and children in peace." The steel door closed behind Lisa. Michael pulled the coat around Chloe and took Ben from the social worker's arms. He signed the transfer papers with Carla Reyes, listening as she gave a few reminders about home visits and the children's therapy schedule. Michael nodded, said thank you, then carried Ben to the car, gripping Chloe's hand as if the wind could sweep her away. That night he mixed the milk, told stories, and soothed the children to sleep. The next morning, he called Frank to begin the long legal process. Life carried on like that, one day after another, built on small but steady acts. 2 years later, the sky looked clearer. Chloe had grown taller, her hair tied up, her hand guiding Ben as he toddled along the brick path in the backyard garden. A small wooden sign hung on the fence painted in white letters, "Mama Catherine's Garden." Tomato plants stretched up in green rows, crowned with yellow blossoms. Chloe bent down to show her brother how to rest his hand on the stem without breaking, her voice bright with excitement. "Daddy, look at this! Ben and I are growing tomatoes for you!" Michael sat back in the wooden chair, resting his notebook on his lap. He watched the children, saw in Chloe the shape of an older sister who knew she was loved and was learning how to love in return. Ben stumbled forward, his tiny shoes smeared with soil, his face lifted in a wide smile. Michael's lips curved into a gentle grin. Deep inside, he whispered a line meant only for the one no longer there. "Catherine, I did it. I kept my promise." Carla Reyes appeared at the back gate, a folder in her hand. She was still assigned to the family's case, though now the visits were only routine. Carla smiled, waved, and said, "I brought the certificate, confirming the therapy program is complete. Chloe is making great progress and Ben is developing normally." Michael rose to his feet and shook her hand. "Thank you for everything." Carla nodded. "Thank you for staying." After Carla left, Chloe ran over, carrying a basket of seedlings. She dropped it onto the bench beside Michael. "Daddy, can you help me with the stakes? I didn't tie them tight enough." Michael held the twine, showing her carefully as he explained, "Wrap it like this, snug enough to hold, but loose enough for the plant to breathe." Ben lingered nearby, every so often pressing a stone into his father's hand as though it were a gift. Michael slipped each one into his pocket, not missing a single piece. A while later, Chloe set the basket down and leaned her head against her father's shoulder. The scent of sun and soil clung to her hair, the truest perfume he had ever known. Michael remembered the first hearing, when those small shoulders trembled with fear. Now they were steady. He asked softly, "How is school?" Chloe smiled. "Rosie asked me to be team leader. I told her about the garden, and she loved the story." Michael nodded. "Tonight I'll make pasta with the first ripe tomatoes. You'll be my sous chef." Chloe laughed. "Yes, Daddy." The back door opened and Mrs. Jones carried out a plate of butter cookies, the aroma clear in the air. She set it down on the small table, her eyes wrinkling with joy as she looked at the two children. "Have some milk, kids." She turned to Michael. "There's a letter from Attorney Frank. He sent the schedule for the final hearing to confirm permanent custody." Michael took the paper, scanned it quickly, and felt as if a heavy stone had finally settled firmly in place. He said, "This afternoon, after your nap, we'll stop by Uncle Frank's office, then go out for ice cream." Ben's head shot up at the word ice cream. "Ice cream?" Michael lifted him into his arms, pretending to think. "What flavor will it be?" Ben laughed loudly. "Strawberry," Chloe chimed in. "I'll choose vanilla for you, Dad, because you said vanilla goes best with Mrs. Jones's cookies." Michael looked at the housekeeper and the three of them burst out laughing. That afternoon, they stopped by Frank's office. The man shook each of their hands, patted Ben's head, and handed Chloe a star-shaped paper clip. "It's done," he said. Simply, "The rest is just living well." On the way back, Chloe held the clip like a treasure, occasionally lifting it to the window so the sunlight could shine through. When they returned to the garden, the day was already fading. Michael washed his hands and went into the kitchen. Chloe stood beside him, rinsing tomatoes, while Ben counted strands of pasta by laying them one by one on the table like pieces of a railroad track. Michael lit the stove, stirred garlic in the pan, and every so often glanced at his children, seeing in that picture a steady rhythm of life he once thought he could never reach again. When dinner was ready, Chloe clasped her hands behind her back, cleared her throat like a tiny announcer, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the chef proudly presents Hayes family pasta with tomato sauce from Mom Catherine's garden." Ben clapped. Michael laughed heartily. "I invite our two distinguished guests to enjoy the meal." After dinner, Chloe ran around the garden, then suddenly stopped, turned back, and hugged him tightly. "Dad, now we're really a family, aren't we?" Michael lifted her onto a chair, wrapped his arms around her, and answered firmly, "Yes, and it will always be that way." Ben hugged their legs, trying to squeeze into the family embrace. Michael gathered both children into his arms and leaned back in the chair. Night fell, but the garden stayed warm with their presence. The shadows of the three overlapped on the grass, forming one solid shape. In the corner, tomato stakes stood upright, the twine holding them just enough without choking, the way Michael had learned to hold his family together. He looked up at the wooden sign and brushed his fingertips across Catherine's name. In that quiet moment, Michael realized he was no longer afraid of courtrooms, flashing cameras, or empty threats. What he held now was his children's laughter, their peaceful sleep, and the steady heartbeat of a true home. Those things were not loud, but they endured. Chloe yawned and nestled her head against his shoulder. Ben dozed off with a tiny green tomato still in his hand. Michael carried them both inside, turned off the lights one by one, checked the locks, and stopped by the children's room once more. He stood at the doorway, listening to their steady breathing, then stepped back and closed the door with a gentle touch. Outside, the night breeze brushed against the fence, carrying the scent of young tomato leaves. Inside, Catherine's photograph on the shelf seemed like a quiet blessing of peace. The story closes with the image of a father and his two children in a lush green garden, with a simple yet profound confirmation. When an adult chooses to stop and listen, a child can escape the shadows. That is the simple but powerful message. The wicked will be punished, the good will be rewarded, and justice must be built upon truth, courage, and unconditional love. Michael was not perfect, but he returned at the right time, stood up to protect Chloe and Ben, and made amends through his actions every single day. We too can do the same for the children around us. What do you think about Chloe's journey from silence to speaking out? Which part touched you the most? The whispered words, "Please, don't hurt me and my brother anymore." Catherine's letter? Or the moment Michael said, "I'm here"? If it were you, what would you do when you noticed even the smallest signal of a child crying for help? Share your thoughts so we can talk together and spread the meaning of this story. I also want to ask how you are doing. Are you watching from somewhere far away, late at night, or maybe in the middle of a busy day? If today has been exhausting, I hope this story gives you a moment of peace. Don't forget to drink some water, rest your eyes, and hug your loved ones if you can. If you believe in heartwarming stories and emotional stories that can lift people up, share this video so that someone else might find strength too. Would you like me to continue telling more journeys of healing, or dive deeper into one of the characters in this story? Leave me a comment and let me know. Thank you for being here, for listening with your whole heart. We will meet again in the next story.